Welcome to Theological Table Talk. I'm Keith Stanglin, the director of the Center for Christian Studies. I'm glad to be back here with you, and I'm joined as usual by Todd Hall. How's it going, Todd?
Good. Going really well today. For me, not so much for Pastor Larry back
Good.
there.
Yeah, I see that you're situated in front of the Tarrant First Baptist Church. So with their interesting sign on the marquee today. So again, those of you listening on Spotify or Apple, you'll want to check out our YouTube version of this podcast episode because Todd has another interesting background. So it's something for everyone. So we're glad you're here and listening today. Today we're going to be talking about issues related to denominations, Christian denominations, and just the phenomenon of denominationalism and why there are so many denominations, maybe something we talk about, but particularly with regard to ecumenism as well, I think is on the docket. Mm-hmm. But especially with regard to a class that we have coming up that the Center for Christian Studies will be offering in January and February of 2024 on Monday nights. So this conversation is in some ways sort of a prelude to that, a teaser, if you like. And if you like the conversation, then you're supposed to go and register for this class if you're listening to this before the class starts on January 8th.
That's right.
Of 2024.
Or after it starts, you can register late. It's all good.
That's true. You won't be able to go to it maybe if it's after February, but you can still register, I suppose. And so if you like the conversation and you're in time for that class, go ahead and register for it. If it's too late, do what you like. If you don't like the conversation today, still register for the class because it's going to be even better than the dialogue that we're about to engage in. So with that, Todd, I think we can just get going with it, probably.
That's good. Yeah. It's the second annual CCS winter course offering. Last year was great, and we had a lot of attendees, and it was a very pressing and relevant topic last year, and so there were a lot of folks, but I think that they got a good taste of what it is that we do at the center, and I'm looking forward to having people back this year. We'll have a special guest lecturer this year. We had several last year. This year we have another one coming in, and we'll reveal that later or something. I don't know.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yes. The final week of the class. That's exactly right. So go to our website, christian-studies.org, to see all the information about the class. It's called Understanding Our Christian Neighbors. So it is a class about, where do all the different Christian denominations come from? What do Christian believers believe in practice that separates them from one another? What are our differences? And then what are the things that unite us? And we're going to spend 7 weeks on this. A lot of history there. There's also a lot of just kind of basic theology that will be great to discuss. So it's a live class. You can do it in person in Austin or on Zoom. Available. So
well, let's talk about the upcoming class. I know that this was not your first time to teach this particular class. You taught a version of this course anyway at Austin Grad of blessed memory when we were there together on faculty. Originally, I think the course was called Traditions in Christian Theology and Ethics or something like that.
Yep.
And that was when Michael Weed originally developed that course, and he, of course, his PhD was in ethics, and so he focused a lot on ethics there. So I guess what I'd say, and hopefully we've got some, Austin grad alum out there listening. I think we've got some subscribers who um, fondly remember the Austin grad days. So I thought, I'm just curious as to how you took this particular course and made it your own. So, I mean, I know that you had probably done something like this before, but what
Yeah.
adjustments did you make to it? What was
Yeah.
your vision for the course? That sort of thing.
So yeah, that's a good question. Actually, it started before I came to Austin grad, when I started teaching a course like this on let's say the college level. Um, David Worley, also of blessed memory,
Yes.
asked me to teach at the Institute for Theology and Christian Ministry in St. Petersburg.
Hmm.
Um, he contacted me about this probably in 2007 or so. And so I went to Russia in 2008. Russia, that probably just alerted all the spy technologies
That's probably
that are
right.
on
Yeah.
that are on Zoom now. My AI companion down there. Yeah, I went to Russia in 2008. Oh, it's FBI at my door. Sorry. Okay. Are you going to edit that out?
No, that's staying in, man. Come
All
on.
right. So went there and taught a course that we called comparative dogmatics, which really is what I just described. But it's dogmatics because it's taking the creedal and confessional documents of these different churches: Eastern Orthodoxy, Roman Catholicism, mainline Protestantism, evangelical Protestantism. When they have creeds and confessions, lining them up on the different topics and just comparing them and
Mm.
contrasting them and seeing, just laying it all out there, but using as primary sources their church's own creeds and confessions, which seems like a pretty good way to do that. So I did that in St. Petersburg with Russian-speaking Christians. It was translated for me, by the way.
Right.
Uh, and
I
and then
remember
I
I did the same.
and then I returned to Harding, where I taught at the time, and probably in the next year or two did a seminar on in theology on that topic, and I think I probably called it comparative dogmatics. I remember it didn't take maybe a week or two for us to abbreviate it to comp dog. So we called the students, and I referred to the course as comp dog, which had a little more of a urban pop culture feel about it. So we enjoyed that. So I had taught it 2 or 3 times probably before I came to teach in Austin. Uh, and then, yeah, I taught it here. I did take over the class that you're talking about. It was Traditions in Christian Theology and Ethics. And as some may be aware, it's not atypical for a professor to come in and take a class that's there in the catalog and then teach whatever you want.
Right.
So I had my class. This one went pretty well with it. And so the ethics part of that was not something I handled so much in that previous comparative dogmatics course. But I did try to work some ethics in there, mainly by just some primary readings in the history of Christian ethics. And so there are ethical traditions also um, from the early church on, and just sort of introduce students really quickly sort of to Aristotelian ethics and Thomas Aquinas. But the bulk of the class was about just theology,
Yeah.
theological distinctives. Ethics is not so. When you ask the question, which I always put the question, is this: why are there so many different denominations? All right, let's just say our starting research question here. Ethics doesn't so much go with denominations, so it doesn't really go to answering that question.
Yeah.
Even though there are ethical traditions, they don't correspond to different denominations quite as much. So by the end of my teaching at Austin Grad, I think we dropped the ethics part of it and
I think that's
didn't
right.
even pretend anymore. It was just, I think we called it Christian theological traditions. Uh, and that was that. Now I teach an ethics class also. I did before at Harding, I do now at Harding School of Theology. Every once in a while I'll teach ethics. So that's important to me. It's just
Yeah.
a distinct topic from the class that we called Christian theological tradition. So yeah, I've taught it at Harding, at Austin Grad. I've taught it at a couple of other places. I taught it to missionaries and ministers in Europe, in Cologne, back over a decade ago. So it's been a favorite of mine for a long time.
Yeah. I will say too that my daughter took that course, and I think that was, if not her favorite, it was one of her favorites. She really loved that course. She and actually my folks took that course, I think, together with you as well. So loved that class. Um, so I think, just for the sake of listeners who aren't don't regularly run in the field of theology, and especially in the academy, I just want to sort of flesh out this word. So you'll hear this word ecumenism used a lot today, and I'm just wondering if you can give sort of a short definition of ecumenism for our listeners. What is it? What's its goal? And I think importantly, what's the motivation behind it?
Yeah, it is in some ways a bit of a loaded word, but it is mainly a 19th and especially 20th century phenomenon. I'm not sure when the word actually became used in the way we're using it here, and as I'm going to define it, but I'm guessing it's got to be modern, and it's got to be certainly widespread only in the 20th century. But it comes from the Greek word oikomene, which just means like the inhabited world, the universe, but not the whole universe, just the globe, the civilized world, whatever, the inhabited world. And so there's a universal aspect to it, and that's universal humanity. Is the oikomene, as the Greeks would have used that word. So in Christian church circles, we use that word to be sort of the opposite of denominationalism, and especially sectarianism. If sectarianism, as we're using it here, it's also a word that can mean a lot of different things, but let's just define it. Something like churches who are very much insular and only fellowship with themselves and think that they are the only manifestation of the one true church, and therefore the only ones going to heaven, that kind of thing. Let's call that sectarianism on the one extreme. On the other hand would be ecumenism, which seeks to find bonds of commonality with other Christian believers, and really emphasize not the distinctives and the differences, but the points of unity, and that we can all, even if we're different, even if we remain different denominations, can be one church. And so the ecumenical movement, the modern ecumenical movement, was an attempt to really downplay the differences between churches and find that sort of mere Christianity, to use C.S. Lewis's phrase, or just, we might say, minimal Christianity, which has a bit of a different connotation to it.
Yeah.
The minimal, bar of orthodoxy that we can all agree is the central essence of the faith. And so all Christians are really one, and those differences get downplayed, diminished, minimized, and even marginalized in some ways. So yeah, that's ecumenism in a nutshell, and the ecumenical movement.
Yeah. And I think that, I mean, ecumenism takes seriously Jesus' prayer in John for the unity of believers. And I think that, one of the things, because a lot of times, in our tradition and other traditions, in terms of sectarian traditions, and I think it's important to remember that every tradition has been sectarian in its history. And it probably still is in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Nearly all, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, it's a part of, and I appreciate the integrity of, remaining in a place that one thinks is correct. So I appreciate that. But I do think that churches that have something of a sectarian past ought to consider, and what I take seriously about the ecumenical discussion is at least taking Jesus' prayer seriously, and how one applies this prayer for the unity of the believers who are following Jesus. And I think I appreciate that. So I want to say, I think ecumenism is a good thing, but I think you're also right. It is problematic when we sort of minimize those things that do make us distinct and different. We had Brad East on a little while ago. I don't remember how long back that was, but our last podcast probably. And I think in that discussion we referenced his article in First Things, and he talks about ecumenism in this article. And one of the things that he laments in that article is what I'm labeling as meh ecumenism. It's my words, not his. But this growing trend that I see, especially among sort of evangelical non-denoms, right, to reject the idea that differences matter. And sometimes it doesn't even matter if you know the differences between these Christian traditions, and to see each body of believers as different expressions of, quote, the kingdom. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing. It's certainly in a lot of ways better than like ugly sectarianism. But I'm just wondering if we could talk through that just a little bit.
Yeah.
Do our distinctives matter? And if so, why and how and that sort of thing? And can they actually be useful in an ecumenical discussion?
Yeah, I do think the distinctives matter. I think hopefully as well, I was about to say something optimistic about our culture, but it didn't take long to dial that back a second. I was going to say, I think maybe we're a little more trained than we used to be to appreciate differences of other people, yet also be able to get along with them. I think in certain contexts it's true, in certain other ones it's not, particularly when it comes
Clearly not.
to
Yeah.
political
Yeah.
issues. But I think, if you kind of turn the corporate media off and the TV off and don't let that don't let those messages permeate and dominate the way we think we should be interacting with others. I think in everyday real life, people understand, and you have to in a multicultural society, understand that we're going to have our different opinions and preferences and beliefs and practices, but we can do so in such a way that we can come to maybe even appreciate the others more than just tolerate, but appreciate
Yeah.
some of those other things, and maybe even learn from them. So that's the kind of balance I think we want to seek when it comes to, be a Christian of conviction who holds your beliefs in a strong way. Know why you believe what you believe. But then you can also think that without thinking you have the corner on the market of all truth when
Yeah.
it comes to Christian theology and thought and practice. In other words, maybe someone who disagrees with me has something to teach me, just as I think I may have something to teach them. So if I'm wanting to teach someone else something that I think is right, I sort of just, have to be open to learning from them as well.
Yeah.
And so that openness, I think, is important. But yeah, that I think when you talk about the ecumenism, where the beliefs get minimized, the distinctives get marginalized and obscured for the sake of greater unity, and they get sacrificed for that. Uh, you have this situation where sectarians and the ecumenists are sort of strange bedfellows here.
Mm.
Neither one wants to know what the others really believe.
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
it's like the sectarians, because everybody else is wrong, so why hear from them at all?
Yeah.
There's no point. And the kind of minimalist ecumenists just also don't care what those other
Yeah.
distinctives are or why, But it could be that when we encounter other believers, that they, and let's say a strange to us, strange doctrine or alien practice, uh, we could condemn it outright. That's the sectarian. We
Right.
could say, I don't care about that. Let's just hug it out,
Love
and
on each other.
yeah, and it's better if you just don't talk about that strange practice or whatever. It seems more responsible to me, and uh, just one, out of intellectual curiosity, in as much as that's a virtue, is to know and to want to know, is where does that alien to me practice come from? What's
Yeah.
its uh, motivation, its origin, its biblical basis, its historical development, and why? What do I find strange about it? How would I do things differently? And then ask the same questions. What's the biblical basis, origin, historical development of my faith in practice? And is it so much better founded than the other? Maybe, maybe not. Um,
Yeah.
and just so knowledge of the people that we feel like we want to, in some concrete way, join hands with, join forces with, be one with. It helps if that is an informed unity, and
Yeah.
not one that's sort of willingly ignorant. Just one thing that comes to mind on this, it's somewhat related, I think. I do a lot of fill-in preaching, and I was filling in at a Church of Christ earlier this year. And someone came up to me after the sermon and said, do you go to the Methodist church? And I said, no. And I thought, well, does this Church of Christ usually have Methodists come in to fill in preach? That would be unusual. But I said, no, I'm not a Methodist. I said, why do you ask? And she said, well, it was that thing you said at the beginning of the sermon, your line at the beginning. And I was thinking, and I said, I repeated what I opened with. I said, grace and peace to you from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. She said, yeah, that's it. She said, we have a friend, a Methodist friend who preaches, and we went to hear him a few months ago, and that's what he said at the beginning. So I thought maybe that was a Methodist thing. I said, well, that's a quotation from the Apostle Paul, in the way he opens most of his letters. So just this, I don't know, some of those practices, that may be strange to us. It could be that we're the strange ones.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
So a
Yeah.
little more information might be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think central to it is there's like two major things that have to happen for good ecumenical discussion. And one is just a recognition of the pursuit of truth, right? No matter what, I mean, the discussion needs to happen, I think, over the distinctives and why, because we ought to all be trying to move into conforming with the truth. And God in his wisdom has made that a communal undertaking. And When we're isolated from each other, we don't learn as we ought to. And then I think the other half of that is just, as you said, an epistemological humility, a theological humility, and a curiosity in both of those areas. I mean, we ought to, I lament the loss of curiosity among especially sectarian Christians. That we ought, curiosity is part of who we are, and I think we tamped that down by saying don't play with strange fire, or all the various arguments, but that doesn't get at what this is really about. God made us explorers, and we ought to be interested in and wanting to know. That meh ecumenism is a lot easier to practice, by the way, I think, among groups that are very similar, right? So, if you have, I don't know, Calvary Chapel over here and a non-denom over here and another community church over here, it's pretty easy among them to say, it doesn't really matter where we differ because it's the kingdom's at work. It starts to get a little more complicated when you're engaging in ecumenical discussions with someone who's actually in a long-standing theological tradition that is different from, so like the Methodist thing, that's a great illustration. And it's like, you don't really get to do, I suppose people do, but it's difficult to do meh ecumenism if you're Orthodox and evangelical, right? It's a pretty big step between the two. I used to work with, you remember, he was the librarian when I came on, and then handed on the reins to me. And he was Russian Orthodox. And I can remember when we first started working together, it was like we were speaking different languages when we would talk theology. I mean, it was.
Y'all were both speaking English, but yes.
Well, yes, yeah, exactly, yes, but man, it was just like he could not understand Churches of Christ. Like it was outside of his ability to understand. And I, of course, at the time, knew next to nothing about Orthodoxy, because in America we just don't. Even though it's growing so quickly now, I'm sure that'll be changing over the next several decades. But most Americans don't even know Orthodoxy exists. So it was just really interesting trying to have those discussions, when you are really that far apart. But they ended up being just very fruitful discussions, and I learned a whole lot. I learned a lot about patristics. I learned a lot about sort of atonement and sanctification and the way that's different between East and West. When you're talking about psychotherapy and all that different kind of stuff. In the East, which is not the same kind of psychotherapy that Freud practices, right? It's and so anyway, I just I think those distinctives can work us towards the goal of ecumenism, because I do think I've learned a lot from understanding what the role that asceticism plays in Christian discipleship, ways that I never would have even thought about had I not engaged with someone who was Orthodox and for whom these things were very important. So I just think that's, these distinctives, understanding them, thinking through them, you can grow and you can help someone else grow, in these discussions. And so I think that part of that is why I think the distinctives are so important. It's, there will come times in public, in the community, and that sort of thing, where we do need to just get together and hug it out, when we're engaged in practical ecumenism in the public square, and we're working towards helping society see truth and goodness, whether it's an abortion debate or whatever. That's where we can practice meh ecumenism when it comes to dogma. But boy, when it comes to accomplishing and working towards Jesus' prayer, that's when I think these distinctives they matter. We can really learn from them.
Yeah, and I'll add to the modern ecumenical movement, particularly in the 20th century, I think has been justly criticized for, in some ways, I mean, it does reflect a modernist worldview where in modernity, it's this idea, there's many ideas included in it, but it includes this idea that we can all be one, think the same thing. There's real emphasis on kind of uniformity of method and practice and beliefs, a kind of globalism in all kinds of areas, including, I think, a lot of that influenced the Christian ecumenical movement as well. And so minimize the differences, all that. And that has, I think, as I say, been, I think, justly criticized. And there's a little more respect for the differences in those discussions now. So.
Yeah. And also the idea that, there is no sort of process to the end of this. That's an interesting thing. If we all just follow this particular process, we'll all be one at the end of it,
Yes.
No, it's a lot more like grief. Very organic. So
yes. And the one it's going to look like is, again, very minimalist, or it looks like the church that's in power, or the majority or whatever. That reflects the cultural zeitgeist.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and part of the reason why I wanted to have this discussion on the podcast is to help people understand what this class is about. And so we'll talk more about that in a minute, but also just to sort of let people know where we're coming from, be they Church of Christ or not. I mean, we've made no attempt to obscure the fact that we, the center, and you and I, are coming from a restoration perspective, specifically Churches of Christ, but that we see the mission of CCS as truly ecumenical. And I just want to make, so part of what I'm thinking is helping people understand, if you attend this class and you're Methodist, I believe you'll be blessed by it. What you won't be getting is proselytism, or what we will be having is real ecumenical dialogue, I think, in the class. And so I wondered if you could just speak to that a little bit. If somebody asks you, how does the Center for Christian Studies, how do we serve, or how can we serve communions that are not in our theological tradition? That sort of thing.
My best response is to recall something that happened when I was teaching at Austin Graduate School of Theology, and perhaps even teaching what was sort of like this course there. It would happen more than once where a student would come to the realization that this is a seminary affiliated with Churches of Christ, and they didn't know that. Like, oh, this is a Church of Christ seminary. I heard that more than once over the years. I generally took that as a compliment. Now, the majority of our students were not in Churches of Christ, so so their peers, were not majority Churches of Christ. The faculty were. But I took it as a compliment because that was a testimony and confirmation that we weren't there to proselytize anyone. And I wasn't there to teach Church of Christism, whatever that may be. But we were there to teach students Scripture in conversation with the historic Christian tradition. And so if a person is interested in Scripture and being taught from the perspective of the historic Christian tradition, then that's already ecumenical in its intent. So a Methodist can come and benefit from this class that we're talking about doing starting in January. And people of any persuasion can. In that sense, it's going to be as descriptive from my perspective. And people, when they have opportunity to comment, and there will be that kind of Q&A setting in the class as well, will say what they want. Who knows, but
that's right.
from my perspective, I will be as descriptive and objective as possible. Now, do I come with biases? Of course.
Yeah.
And you will probably, a student in that class a participant will probably hear that, and that will come through. But yeah, I mean, I take I would say a little bit of, if I can, humble pride in having been accused over my career of being a Calvinist from my writing. I'm not a Calvinist.
Right.
Of someone sitting through my class and not knowing I was a member of the Church of Christ. They
Yeah.
didn't say what I was, but yeah, we're not going to be there to indoctrinate anyone, but to
Yeah.
describe what different believers believe and practice about their Christian faith.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's I suppose this will come out later when we finish having our restoration history class developed, but I think that's actually a great part of the restoration movement. I think it's inherently ecumenical in its return to scripture. And obviously, in a lot of ways, Churches of Christ lost their way in that particular project. Not all of us, but some. But I think that I always thought at Austin Grad, in terms of what we did, that was an outgrowth of our tradition as much as anything else. It's who we are as a tradition historically. Now, it didn't, like I said, it didn't always work out that way. You always hear, oh, Church of Christ think they're the only ones going to heaven or whatever else. But we have the bones, we have the foundation, the structure for real ecumenical work in terms of the commitment of the restoration movement founders. And that works out, I think, in what we do.
Yeah. And that you look at the practices, that Churches of Christ have been known for. One reason that students didn't know, if they came to chapel and were sitting there in a very sort of unadorned liturgy, singing a cappella, right?
Yeah.
Well, that is a very ecumenical practice. It is, in our context in America, very, very much distinctive, makes you stand out like a sore thumb, maybe. But it's ecumenical in the sense that no one in the history of the church has contested that a cappella singing is wrong.
Yeah.
Plenty throughout the history of the church have resisted the use of instruments in worship, but singing in worship, a few Anabaptists, didn't like singing at all in worship, but with the very few exceptions, yeah, if you're going to sing, there's nothing wrong with singing a cappella, right?
Right.
So that's just that's an ecumenical position, and the same is true with the other things that Churches of Christ have sort of not been like other Protestants or even evangelicals, especially a cappella singing, a weekly Lord's Supper, baptism by immersion for forgiveness of sins. Those practices I just mentioned were all the practices of the Universal Church 1,000 years after the founding of the church. So those are the ecumenical practices of the church.
Yeah.
They have changed in the last few hundred years in this country, in the United States. But so yeah, these are basically ecumenical positions that no one really disagreed with before the modern period.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they can become, it is interesting, just fascinating that, it just shows how humans are, but we can take ecumenical things and make them sectarian.
Yes, that's true. And we've done that as well in Churches of Christ.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so moving towards the end, I wanted to say, especially sort of engaging a couple of different questions. One, okay, when you taught this class at Austin Grad, it was what, 14, 15 weeks? Usually 3 hours a week.
Right.
Um,
Yep.
How are you adjusting this one to fit this particular context? What are we asking of people who attend the class? I'm assuming we're not going to require them. In fact, we may not even read were they to write them a research paper of any kind.
No. Yeah, no, that's a good question. And what I'm going to say here goes for all the live classes we do. So at a, let's say, college level or seminary level, you have 40 to 45 hours of lectures in a long semester. And then you have, 50 to 100 pages of reading assignments every week. And then you have, yes, writing assignments and other things. We're abridging that. So instead of 15 weeks, we're doing 7 weeks, 7 Monday evenings. Instead of 3-hour meetings, we're doing an hour and a half. So it's much more, I think, manageable for a person who is not in this full time, but wants a good, reliable, in-depth study of these topics in a live setting, whether it's through Zoom or in person, where you can interact and engage in some of that Q&A as well. There will be readings that, again, I'm not going to test anyone over, so you don't have to do it, I guess. But if you want to get the most out of class, you can do it. I'm going to recommend a couple of books that are full-length books. And then I'll have some videos on YouTube to watch that I think are helpful or help us get into a discussion, and also a few readings online. But no required books for people to buy or anything if they don't want to. But I'll recommend resources that you can take deeper. So those things, let's say, are made much more accessible. I can't help but say also, since this is in some ways a promotion for that class, is that we're also much less expensive than an accredited seminary. We're not trying to have accreditation from the government. We're not giving away a diploma for taking this class. If you like, I can make up a certificate for you to hang up that you took the class. But what we're after is just good information and education for people who want it. So at your typical seminary, I looked actually recently at a couple of seminaries here in Texas. Per credit hour, they ranged between $600 and $800 a credit hour. And for a 3-hour class, which is the kind you typically get, that's what I would teach this as. Then that would be like, between $2,100 and $2,400 or so for a class. Ours is $150 for the whole class. All right. So a fraction of the cost. And to our journal subscribers, you get $50 off. To those who subscribe to First Things, another $50 off. All that's on the website. So there are ways to discount this. I would say too, like if you're not a journalist, you don't subscribe to our Journal of Christian Studies, it's actually less to subscribe than the $50 discount. So you should subscribe and still get a discount.
That's right. Yeah.
Even if you didn't read it, you'll want to read it.
Yeah, that's right.
We're trying to we don't want to price people out of this, but I think it helps to have a little skin in the game as well, and commitment to it for on the student end. So that worked well last year, and people were appreciative. So
I think that's great. And I think about what we're now calling CCS Live. These annual live courses, maybe going to a couple of years. We're kicking all that around. I think there's a couple of things. One is I think Christians need to understand how important it is to invest their time in better understanding their faith and in better understanding, how they ought to be living in the world. And church leaders need to be encouraging people towards things like this. I'm not saying you have to, go tell your congregation to sign up for this class, although you should. But, people really do need to invest in training themselves in this way as much as they invest, if not more, in other things. And I want to just encourage people to, find ways to stretch yourself and to grow and to engage in things that you can really get educated in. And then, I also think that I actually see that. You have been blessed to work with a group of young adults at your congregation, and I've known several here at my congregation as well who are very interested in going deeper and digging more. And a lot of times churches haven't been equipped for that. Your senior minister is usually your most educated person. He's got a lot of work to do. It's difficult for him to fill that role. And I just think that, churches need to be thinking about, okay, how do we scratch that itch? Because we do have people that would be willing to invest their time into learning more about what it is that they believe. And I just think that's so good. And I think that's really what our goal has been at CCS is to meet that particular need. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to do that, and I'm grateful for you teaching this course this semester. I'll be in there, obviously, and bringing a lot of friends and family who haven't signed up yet. Maddie, sign up.
They will.
They will.
And all these people will get their churches to sign up as well.
That's right. Yeah.
When churches zoom in on one device as a group, they get a deep discount as well. That's on the website. So
yeah, that's huge. Well, so just one more quick question. Well, two more questions. So first, though, I want to ask you this. I mean, just most importantly, what is it that you want people to come away from this class with? Like, what's the goal for the people who come to class?
There are a lot of objectives, I suppose, but if I were boiling it down, I would say a greater appreciation for what they believe and why, and also a greater appreciation for some other belief or practice from another Christian denomination that maybe they haven't understood before. And so, but because it's easy for us, particularly in an old school or sectarian setting, to say what we don't like about the other, the Christian other here, but to look at Orthodoxy or Roman Catholicism if you're an evangelical, or if you're, Orthodox or Roman Catholic, to look at the Church of Christ and to say, here's what I really appreciate about that church fellowship and what they bring to this ecumenical table discussion that we're having here. So that kind of appreciation is what we're after. It's not going to be look at how wrong everyone else is,
right?
Which could be an outcome of a class with this topic. I realize that is not what we're after.
no, and that's so great. I think part of what a class like this can be helpful with is sort of deconstructing, in some ways, things that we've inherited that we don't even realize we've inherited, in terms of ideas and thoughts. And I remember the first time I engaged with thinking through beautiful cathedrals, for instance. There's a lot of post-reformed movements that see these as sort of extravagant, and we should rather have unadorned things. And I remember the first time I understood what the purpose of a cathedral was, and why it was built with such, intricate architecture and those kinds of things, in the sense of transporting one in worship into the heavenly court. Well, that really changes completely for me. Not necessarily the way I would build a church building, for instance, but it's not that sort of cheap shot. Oh, it's just extravagant, and there's all this stuff, all the criticisms that low church evangelicals tend to have about cathedrals and that sort of thing. when you realize what the purpose and function was, you can start to take it seriously, and it open your eyes to things. And so I think in that way, a class like this just can be so very helpful in terms of opening your eyes and recognizing at least the whys behind the differences, and that makes a huge difference in terms of how we engage with our Christian neighbors.
Yeah.
So one more question. In St. Pete, I was in St. Petersburg in 2003 or 4 and taught a course on grief at ITCM. So question, did you actually make it to the McDonald's there in St. Petersburg?
I don't recall making it there. I don't
Oh,
know. I don't think so.
oh, you're missing out.
Really?
Yeah, my dad and I went, and we walked over to the McDonald's like it was in the morning, and it's just hilarious because, here we are. I mean, you don't know anything from Russian, right? So, and you go into McDonald's, it's not like going into a touristy place, right? It's a McDonald's, but they don't have it in Russian and English. So we just kind of had to point at what we wanted. And I think I pointed at the breakfast sausage sandwich or whatever it was, Of course, you have no idea what you're going to get. And it was the best sausage breakfast thing I've ever had. So it was a sausage patty with mayo, lettuce, tomatoes on I think an English muffin. Not something you'd expect, but it was pretty wonderful.
No, I think McDonald's, I have probably I've been to a few overseas. They generally are different and better than McDonald's in the States.
Yeah,
I
that's the
think
thing.
that's a general rule.
I'm going to go to my local McDonald's and tell them they need to talk to those guys in St. Pete, because that was a great breakfast. It really
You do
was.
that. You do that. Let me know how that works out.
I will. All right. Well, thanks for the discussion today.
Yeah. Thank you, Todd. And thanks to all of you for listening to Theological Table Talk today. If you have gotten this far in the conversation, yet you still have not followed or subscribed to Theological Table Talk, what's wrong with you? Subscribe on Spotify or Apple. And these episodes, as you've heard, are also available on our Center for Christian Studies YouTube channel, video and all. Give the podcast a like and a 5-star review, if you please. Share a comment or a question for us to discuss, or suggest topics and guests for us in those comments, or email us at info@christian-studies.org. And check out the Center for Christian Studies at christian-studies.org, our website. There you will see how you can register for this class that we were talking about, coming up on January 8th of 2024. If you're listening to this after the fact, then you missed a good class. But if you like what you see on the website, if you like what you've heard here, find that give button on there. And I know that some of you have a year-end gift that's just burning a hole in your pocket. Or again, if you're listening to this podcast at the beginning of the year, I perceive that it's a beginning of the year gift, or maybe a mid-year gift, or a winter or spring, summer, fall gift. Any of those we do accept. So thanks for listening. Thanks for joining us at the table at Theological Table Talk. Until next time.